They had taught it in schools. They had stamped it in books and carved it onto data cores. Earth was gone. It had been wiped out, erased from the stars, consumed in a war it had never been equipped to win. For 100 years, the story had been repeated in every Dominion colony, in every spacefaring academy, and whispered as bedtime reassurance to alien-born children. The humans were noble but fragile, brave but outdated, a species of emotion, of poetry and memory, that had reached too far into the dark and had been swallowed whole. There were no monuments, no eulogies, only silence, sculpted by fear and convenience. And then, on the edge of a dead system older than the Dominion itself, something blinked a pulse, older than any known signal code, flaring in frequencies that should not have existed. The pulse carried a single symbol, burned into the vacuum like a scar across time, 3 interlocked rings. Earth's last known alliance seal. And just like that, the myth began to crack. The first patrol ship that detected the pulse was a Relic-class cruiser assigned to archival clean-up near the remains of Sector Arvale, a region considered uninhabitable due to radiation drift from long-extinct stars. The crew was not trained for combat, not even exploration. They were bureaucrats with weapons, but the moment the symbol appeared on their long-range scanner, the ship's internal gravity fluctuated, lights dimmed, then froze. The centralized stuttered mid-command and played a voice file it had never been programmed to contain. It was a female voice, calm and unafraid. It said, "They buried us with fire and silence, but memory is deeper than space. We are returning." Then the ship lost power completely for 12 minutes. When systems came back online, the captain was found unconscious, hand clenched around a piece of old earth alloy, the kind that had not existed in this quadrant in over a century. The crew transmitted what they had found, but no confirmation came. Their message was intercepted, rerouted, and buried. Dominion Command labeled it interference, sensor error, cosmic fluke, but the truth had already begun to bleed. At first, only rumors crept through the undercurrent of the galaxy. Smugglers claimed they saw human ships in the shadows of uncharted moons. Miners spoke of hearing breathing through comms during solo runs. One freighter crew, hauling synthetic food units to the outer rim, swore they were hailed in ancient Terran Morse, but when they played back the audio, it was gone, not corrupted, absent, as if erased by something that understood how history was silenced. Dominion intelligence filed every report under anomaly, unverified, dismissed, but every report included one detail in common: a presence, not a fleet, not a weapon, a pressure, the feeling of being watched by something that should have died. And in that presence, a name began to return to their collective minds: Earth. What the galaxy never knew was that Earth had not died. It had hidden, not from fear, from strategy. It had recoiled like a muscle before striking, shedding its wounded body into the depths of time, taking with it its last warriors, its last voices, and its last unresolved grief. For 100 years, it had not slept. It had evolved, in silence, in darkness, unseen and unheard. It had buried its pain so deep in space that even light could not reach it. And now it was unfolding again, not with sirens, not with missiles, but with memory. Ancient satellites long thought dead began activating across abandoned sectors. Artifacts and alien museums flickered with strange energy. Languages forgotten even by humans reappeared in Dominion data logs. And in the dreams of those who had once killed humans, voices began to whisper, not accusing, not angry, just present. The Dominion, drunk on peace and disinformation, did not act quickly. They issued statements, propaganda. They reminded their citizens that Earth was fiction now, a closed chapter. But the cracks kept forming. Every Dominion citizen born within the past 50 years had never seen a living human. They only knew the word through cautionary tales and propaganda. But now, they began to ask questions. Why were there no remains? Why were there no ruins? Why was every Earth sector map corrupted or sealed? And more urgently, why did people start dreaming of Earth as if they had lived there? On the orbital station Virus Prime, a child woke screaming and carved a symbol into the wall with her fingernail out of 3 interlocked rings. She had never seen them before. Her family had no human ancestry. She had never left the station. The next day, 5 more children repeated the same thing. Across Dominion-controlled space, It was spreading, not a virus, not a signal, a remembering, a returning. Dominion scientists attempted to track the pattern. They failed. The pattern was not digital, it was emotional, psychological, buried in generations, passed not by blood, but by guilt. And then came the proof, not theory, not myth, a ship, massive, human in design, but unlike anything in known records. It emerged from a gravitational wound near the blackened sector known as the Hollow Drift. It bore no call sign, no registry. It was scarred, dark, its armor blackened like volcanic stone. But upon its hull, the three interlocked rings pulsed in dull blue. It did not communicate. It did not fire. It only waited, and around it, all Dominion surveillance probes died. The ship made no threats, but its silence was louder than any declaration. It carried the stillness of justice, patient and absolute. Dominion command scrambled to respond. They prepared fleets. They tried to jam the ship's presence with signal fog, but every system that attempted to target it lost power. The ship was not invading, it was reminding, and with it, Earth had returned, not to reclaim land, not to bargain. It had returned to be remembered. And as the Dominion watched in helpless awe, one last signal echoed from the ship, a human voice, old and weary, spoken in flawless Dominion dialect. It said, "You knew what you did, now you will know what we became." And then, all stars near the Hollow Drift began to dim. The darkness that gathered near the Hollow Drift was not the absence of light but the weight of memory returning to the places that had once denied it. From the outer ring of Dominion space to the neutral trading moons of the Polar Belt, systems that had long considered themselves insulated from war began to experience a slow but deliberate unraveling. Communication satellites short-circuited with no warning. Navigation charts, long trusted and reinforced by centuries of stellar cartography, began returning false coordinates when approaching the dead sectors where Earth had once been. Cargo vessels reported entire jump routes flickering like holograms, replaced with grainy footage of human cities that no longer existed. Not real time, not broadcasts, memories. Somehow, space itself had become a canvas for what Earth had carried silently for 100 years. And still, the Dominion called it coincidence. Still, they insisted that the ship near the Hollow Drift was a rogue artifact, a final echo of a forgotten people. But deep in the intelligence chambers where politicians no longer smiled and commanders no longer spoke above a whisper, they began to ask each other the question they had buried since the war ended. What if Earth had never died? On the moon station of Velastra, a Dominion scientific outpost dedicated to artificial memory transfer, a senior researcher named Colvan discovered something impossible inside an untagged data core recovered from the wreckage of a warrior cruiser. The file within contained not information but sensation, a preserved consciousness, decades old, encoded not in language but in feeling. The moment they activated it, the lights dimmed, and every monitor displayed a woman's face. Calm, steady, her eyes were closed, but her voice filled the room. She said, "You do not remember me, but I remember you. You watched me die. And still, I begged for your mercy." She opened her eyes then, and every system on the moon station crashed. Not from power loss, from grief overload, as if emotion itself had become a virus. When the station came back online hours later, the core was gone, erased without trace, and every researcher present submitted resignation notices before disappearing entirely from the public grid. Elsewhere, in Dominion-controlled space, these incidents were written off as psychological warfare, propaganda, an attempt to create fear through myth. But then the names began to surface, not modern names, not recent ones. The names of the forgotten, soldiers who had been listed as killed in action during the Earth conflict, civilians who had disappeared during planetary cleansing campaigns, prisoners who had died in orbit without ever being documented. Their names began appearing in random system logs, scratched into docking bay walls, written in the frost of cryotube glass. The names were not shouted, not broadcast, they were whispered into the metal, into the systems, into the breath of the ships themselves. Dominion soldiers began having dreams in which they heard those names recited to them one by one, and when they woke, the names were written on their hands. A Dominion tribunal convened in secret. High-level tacticians, archive ministers, and Legacy Council members gathered to assess what they now admitted was a crisis. But none of them could speak for long without the room growing colder. the air denser. Surveillance footage from that meeting later revealed a moment where, for precisely 8 seconds, every official in the room froze. Their eyes turned upward, their mouths opened, not in speech but in shock. When the footage was reviewed, those 8 seconds were replaced with static. But every participant in that meeting would later be declared mentally unfit for service. Some wept uncontrollably, others refused to speak, and one, a veteran fleet commander who had overseen Earth's final orbital bombardment, vanished entirely. His last transmission contained only 2 words, "They remember." While the Dominion floundered under the weight of growing silence, ordinary citizens began to feel the shift in ways that data could not capture. On the border world of Lorion, a young girl began sketching detailed schematics of human ships. She had never seen one. Her family had no access to military archives, yet her drawings matched models that had been destroyed a century ago. When asked how she knew, she only said, "I saw them in my sleep." In a dream, and they were crying. In a nearby agricultural dome, a harvest worker unearthed what appeared to be a human dog tag. He had never touched metal that cold before. He died 4 hours later from unexplained heart failure. Before his final breath, he whispered, "I can hear the stars remembering." The hollow drift, now marked as a Class 7 black zone, was surrounded by Dominion ships. They did not attack the Earth vessel. They did not even approach. They simply orbited, waiting, trying to understand. Probes were sent. They vanished. Not destroyed. Simply removed from existence. One pilot, desperate for glory, flew a fighter too close to the perimeter. His last words were recorded. He said, "I see them. I see all of them. Their faces are inside the stars." His ship never returned, and the stars near the drift continued to dim, one by one, in a pattern that matched the names of cities lost during Earth's final stand. Then the signals began to spread, not from the Earth ship, but from the systems around it. Old beacons, long considered dead, lit up in sequence. Each one carried a different phrase in a different language, but when translated, every message meant the same thing. "We are what you buried. We are what you forgot. We are what you built your peace on. And now, we are awake." The signals could not be blocked. Dominion systems trying to jam them found their own messages overwritten. Recruitment broadcasts were replaced with old Earth lullabies. Propaganda displays began flashing images of human eyes, staring silently, not accusing, not pleading, just remembering. Dominion citizens, especially those born after the war, began to fracture. Some rebelled against their own systems, claiming that the truth had been hidden from them. Others shut down completely, refusing to speak, eat, or work, haunted by a sorrow they could not name. Dominion soldiers deployed to contain these uprisings began defecting. One commander sent a single report before abandoning his post. It said, "I served in ignorance. I will not serve in denial." And through it all, the Earth ship remained still, silent, waiting, as if giving the galaxy one last chance to remember willingly, to admit the crime they had all helped to cover. But the Dominion had not learned how to remember. They had only learned how to win. And now, they stood before a presence that could not be defeated, because it did not come to fight. It came to be seen. And when the last warning beacon flashed red across the Dominion border, it did not say "threat detected." It said "history returning." And from the center of the hollow drift, a second ship arrived. The second ship emerged from the hollow drift without warning, without ripple, as if it had always been there, simply waiting for the first to remember where it had left it behind. It was smaller than the first vessel, but darker, more angular, built not for travel but for presence. Its outer hull layered with what appeared to be engraved names that shifted constantly like liquid memory crawling across armor. Unlike the first, this ship pulsed with faint red illumination along its spine, and wherever it moved, Dominion systems reported loss of local time synchronization, as though the very measurement of existence distorted in its proximity. On board the nearest Dominion dreadnought, command officers observed through cloaked sensors, their screens flickering with interference that was not electronic but emotional, a saturation of unease that made officers hallucinate the smell of burning stone and the sound of voices whispering names of the long dead. The ship did not hail, it did not broadcast, it simply faced the Dominion fleet and waited. Inside Dominion command, Panic fermented beneath the polished surface of control. Military analysts demanded immediate engagement, while political figures begged for restraint, fearing what retaliation might awaken in full. None of them admitted it aloud, but all knew the truth settling into their bones. This was not an attack, it was an arrival. A reckoning sculpted from all the moments the Dominion had convinced itself that silence was forgiveness. Across neutral systems, where Dominion law held less weight, the appearance of a second Earth vastly ignited hysteria and reverence in equal measure. On the moon of Sroon, monks abandoned centuries of worship to begin reciting ancient Earth poems they had never been taught. On the mining colony of Terrell Vein, atmospheric pressure fluctuated across all domes, and every window showed reflections of human faces that were not present in the room. In the interstellar market of Forest 9, every human artifact, once mocked and sold as curiosities, now glowed faintly, emitting low-frequency pulses that aligned with the rhythm of human brainwaves. The return of Earth had stopped being rumor. It had become law, not written in books, but burned into consciousness. The ships had not fired a single weapon, and yet the Dominion was bleeding not from its borders, but from its belief. The belief that it had won. The belief that what it destroyed would never rise again. On board the first Earth ship, which had remained still since its arrival, something shifted. Not movement, not sound, but intention. For the first time, its massive exterior began to reconfigure. Plates turned, lights dimmed and brightened in sequence. And in the center of the hull, a new symbol appeared. 3 rings again, but now intersected by a vertical line at the old Earth sigil for remembrance. The message was clear. It was not only Earth returning, it was Earth remembering. Dominion Command initiated emergency protocols, deploying their elite Shadow Line battalion to intercept the second vessel. Trained to fight in zero-gravity warfare, these soldiers had been genetically enhanced and mentally conditioned to resist genetic warfare. But as their ships neared the edge of the hollow drift, every soldier began reporting identical visions, not of war, not of strategy, of a single moment, a human child holding their hand out in peace before being vaporized in a flash of white light. This memory did not exist in Dominion archives, but it lived in every soldier now, etched into their minds with such precision that some screamed and removed their helmets in space, trying to silence the image. None of the Shadow Line battalion returned. Their ships remained, powered down, drifting like forgotten relics caught between two ghosts. In the political chambers of the core Dominion circle, debates disintegrated into silence. One by one, representatives stopped speaking, stopped arguing. For across their personal deities' dreams, a new feed had appeared. Not hacked, not forced, given. A live transmission from the bridge of the first Earth ship. It showed no crew, no life forms, only a single chair at the center of the chamber, facing away from the camera. On the floor, hundreds of Dominion medals were laid out in a circle, each one burned with the initials of a human name. Some of the names belonged to people long thought imaginary, others to those the Dominion had sworn never existed. A voice began to speak, not through speakers, but directly into the minds of every representative. It said, "You swore we were gone, you taught your children that we surrendered, you taught the stars that memory was weakness. But memory is a weapon, and it remembers you." Meanwhile, across former human territories long abandoned, quarantined, or stripped for resources, a strange phenomena took root. Plants that had not bloomed in a century burst through sterilized soil. Weather patterns stabilized around ruined cities. Craters repaired themselves in slow, shifting waves of light. The land itself responded to the return, not because it had been waiting for technology, but because it had been waiting for truth. And in the center of old Earth space, a gravitational anomaly formed, not like a black hole or a star, but like a wound healing in reverse. Scientists watching it began to cry without knowing why. They said it sounded like a heartbeat. Dominion leadership could no longer contain the spread. Their systems failed to block the feed. Their weapons failed to lock on targets. Their soldiers failed to remember who they were fighting. Earth was not just returning. Earth was changing the rules. And then, the second ship opened. A single figure stepped forward, floating through the void without a suit, without protection, surrounded by a pale blue light that bent gravity and time around them. Their face was human. Their eyes were endless. Their presence collapsed weapon systems within range. Surveillance footage caught only a glimpse before freezing a child, no older than 10, hovering with arms spread wide, and on their chest, burned into fabric that shimmered like space itself. The three rings glowed. They said nothing, but every Dominion system heard the same phrase echo through its circuits. You killed what you could not understand, and now we will help you understand. The child hovered in the black of space, arms gently outstretched, bathed in a soft, cold light that did not come from any star. The second ship, from which they had emerged, remained motionless behind them. Its angular structure shimmered faintly, as though it were made of memory instead of metal. The first Earth ship had not moved. Neither had made a sound. But across Dominion systems, across battle-hardened vessels and hardened colonies, a silence fell so heavy it fractured thought. Commanders forgot orders. Pilots lost track of their trajectories. Onboard artificial intelligences paused mid-task, not due to code, but because something older than code had entered the air. This was not a glitch. This was not a signal. This was presence. The child spoke no words, and yet, every mind on every ship heard the same sentence. You killed what you could not understand. Now we will help you understand. The words were not threatening. They were not angry, but they carried weight, enough to bend history, enough to dissolve denial. And as those words echoed inside the bones of every listener, things began to change. The temperature aboard every Dominion vessel dropped by 3 degrees. Environmental controls failed to compensate. Breathing felt heavier. The walls creaked, not from stress, but from age, as though the ships had become older just by hearing the voice. On a destroyer near the outer rim, the crew began to see names written on their control panels. Names they did not know. Names they later realized matched human casualties from the orbital siege of Earth. The panels did not display these names digitally. They appeared carved, etched, and could not be erased. In the Dominion Core archive, screens flickered. Entire data sets were overwritten not by code, but by image. Moving images, silent scenes of Earth before its fall. A mother helping her child plant a tree. A man holding the hand of a dying comrade. A young girl playing music in a ruined street. No blood, no fire, just life. Life that had been lost. Life that had been taken. One Dominion senator collapsed during a broadcast when her personal tablet displayed a recording of her grandfather authorizing the purge of Earth's orbital colonies. The footage had been sealed, classified. She had never seen it, but it played, clear, unedited, and when it finished, the tablet shut off permanently. It would not respond again. In hospitals across Dominion territory, children who had never heard of Earth began to speak its languages in their sleep. Some described landscapes they had never seen. One child sketched a city that historians later confirmed matched an ancient Earth capital destroyed in the first wave of attacks. The child had never touched a book, never watched a history feed. The memory had come from somewhere deeper, somewhere inherited. The Dominion Council met in emergency session. They argued whether to attack, whether to retreat, whether to issue apologies. No one could agree, because for the first time in generations, they no longer believed they were in control. Some demanded the child be captured, but the moment that suggestion left their mouth, every light in the chamber died, and a voice, not angry but absolute, whispered through the walls. Number. The silence that followed lasted 7 minutes. No one moved. No one breathed. The lights returned, and no one spoke of capture again. On board the first Earth ship, the hull began to shift. Not mechanically, organically. Panels folded open like petals. Symbols lit up along its spine. Not in any known language, but those who saw them felt them, understood them. Without translation, they meant truth. They meant cost. They meant return. As the symbols pulsed, Dominion fleets attempted to retreat. Engines failed. Not damaged, no jammed, simply unwilling. Navigation systems returned only one set of coordinates. Earth, not Earth's position, but Earth's memory. A coordinate in time, a place that no longer existed physically, but that was calling, drawing them in. In a science facility near the Quarry Cluster, an ancient Earth beacon long considered inert activated for the first time in 100 years. It sent no distress, no command, only a recording. The face of a human woman. She looked directly into the lens and said, "If this is playing, We have fallen, but if this is playing, we also survived. We left no map, only pain. You must remember. Then the feed ended, and the beacon exploded without harming anything around it, as if its purpose had been served. Back in orbit, the child raised a hand. Slowly, deliberately, the stars behind them rippled like water, then shattered, not violently, but with the sound of breaking silence. A tear in space opened, a wound. Through it, a planet emerged. It was Earth, or it looked like Earth. But it was not where Earth had been. It was cleaner, older, more alive, a memory made solid, a truth given form. Dominion sensors could not analyze it. Every attempt returned the same word: denied. Soldiers across the fleet began to see things, faces in reflections, hands reaching out from shadow, not to grab, not to attack, but to ask, "Do you remember me?" Some fell to their knees, others screamed. One ship turned its weapons inward and was destroyed before it could fire, not by force, by choice. The crew had chosen, the ship had obeyed, because something deeper than command was now in play. The child lowered their hand, and from the second ship, another light began to grow. This one red, cold, heavy. It pulsed once, then again. With each pulse, Dominion technology failed. Engines stopped, shields dropped, weapons deactivated, not broken, silenced. Dominion was not under attack. Dominion was being disarmed, not by missiles, but by memory. And then the child spoke again. "You tried to erase us. You buried our story. But stories are seeds, and now you will see what grew." The red light expanded, slowly, and the first Earth ship turned to face the new Earth that had appeared. Everything began to tremble. The trembling that gripped the Dominion fleet was not mechanical. It did not begin with engines or systems. It started in the silence between thoughts, in the spaces where memory hides when people decide to forget. The planet that now hovered in space should not have existed. It had not been there a moment before. It had no orbital path, no previous record, no gravity trail, yet it cast shadows. It generated weather. It sang on deep-range sensors in a frequency that made even hardened soldiers feel like children hearing a lullaby they had never known. Every Dominion captain stared at their displays. The atmosphere of the new world pulsed a soft blue. Its clouds moved unnaturally slow. Underneath the mist, they saw lights. Not electric, not artificial, something older, something alive. There were structures on the surface, towers, spires, shapes that suggested intelligence but defied analysis. Their systems returned no data. Every attempt at a scan came back with the same response: access denied. The two Earth ships remained motionless. The child remained in place between them, their eyes closed as if listening to something even deeper than space. Across the Dominion Central Command sectors, panic had begun to set in. Though no one spoke of it aloud, orders were being written, then deleted. Tactical teams waited for commands that never arrived. Leadership channels had gone quiet, not because systems failed, but because those in charge had run out of lies. They had told their people Earth was gone. They had made them believe Earth had never truly mattered, that humans were a primitive culture clinging to old dreams. But now they watched as a planet formed itself from silence and memory and waited like a verdict suspended in time. Aboard the ship Silverian's Edge, Admiral Krill stood at the observation window with his hands behind his back. His rank gave him power. His years gave him caution. But in that moment, he felt like a child again, a student, watching something that should have stayed in stories walk back into reality. He whispered the word Earth without meaning to, and when he did, the lights on the bridge dimmed. Not failure, recognition. On hundreds of Dominion civilian worlds, the signal returned. The voice of the child, calm, clear, present. "You destroyed our bodies, but not our name. You buried our truth, but truth does not rot. It grows in the dark, and now it stands before you." Then the voice stopped. Every starship in the sector blinked their lights once, all at the same moment. A pulse, like breath, then stillness again. Scientists tried to explain the event. They failed. Priests called it a judgment. Rebels called it justice. Survivors wept. On a mining station near the edge of the cold belt, a woman uncovered an old Terran relic buried under 2 meters of rock, a metal ring engraved with the names of 3 cities destroyed during the orbital siege. As she held it, her hands bled without injury. The blood traced letters onto the floor in a language she had never learned. The letters read, "Remember us." Back at the hollow drift, The first Earth ship began to move. Not with thrusters, not with sound. It glided forward as if space itself made way for it. The second ship followed. Together, they passed the child without touching them. The child lowered their hands. Their eyes opened. They turned to face the Dominion fleet. There was no anger in their expression, only mourning, as if what came next was not punishment, but responsibility. Inside the Dominion flagship, weapon systems activated without command, not to fire, to eject. Missiles and kinetic arms launched out into space without targets. They floated like metal offerings, drifting harmlessly into the void. One officer tried to shut it down. His hands passed through the console, as if the ship no longer needed him, as if it had decided to surrender on its own. The planet below the Earth. Ships began to react. Light patterns spread across its surface. Cities lit up. Massive structures aligned. From orbit, the shape became clear. It was a map, not of stars, but of scars. Every impact, every battlefield, every loss Earth had suffered was outlined in shining white against the surface of the world. A history told without words. Dominion crews fell silent. On the observation decks, some dropped to their knees. Others stood still, hands clenched, faces pale, because they finally understood. This was not an attack, it was a memorial, a graveyard that had refused to remain buried, and now it demanded witnesses. Then came the change. The light from the first ship turned gold. It wrapped around the second ship like a thread. Together, the ships aimed toward the Dominion fleet. Still no weapons, still no sound, but across every Dominion system, screens flashed with a message. This is the moment you must decide. Stand with silence, or stand with truth. There was no sender, no encryption, just the message. Then the countdown began. From 100, slowly, steadily. No one knew what would happen at 0. No one dared to ask. Admiral Krill gave no order. He simply turned from the window and sat down. Around him, officers removed their command pins and placed them on their consoles, one by one. No words, no resistance. A choice had been made. But the countdown continued. 90, 89, 88, and as it did, the new Earth below shifted. The lights began to spiral inward, toward a single point at the heart of the planet, a point that glowed brighter with each passing second. Then it opened. A beam of light shot from the planet into the sky. It passed between the Earth ships. It pierced the dark. It reached across space and time. And in its glow, every person who had ever served in the war saw something they had forgotten. A moment, a face, a plea, the last words of someone they had left behind. And that was when they knew. This was not about Earth. This was about memory, and memory had just become the most powerful force in the galaxy. The countdown reached 1, then 0, and the galaxy held its breath. The instant the countdown reached 0, the galaxy did not erupt in chaos or violence, as many had feared, but instead fell into a silence so absolute it seemed to erase the very idea of sound itself. There was no blast, no collapse, no pulse, only a stillness so dense that space felt heavier, as if memory had become gravity. Every Dominion fleet held position, their weapon systems offline, their engines dormant, their command chains suspended in something far stronger than fear. The two Earth ships remained aligned in formation, the red and gold light between them deepening in intensity until it could no longer be measured by spectrum but only by the pressure it exerted on the hearts of those watching. The child remained still, their gaze lowered, their body calm, and as the beam of energy from the reborn Earth continued to pulse skyward, something began to shift across every Dominion outpost and capital world. Screens flickered, lights dimmed, the walls of command centers changed color slightly, not visually, but perceptually, as if the places themselves had been stained by reflection. Inside the Dominion High Council's secure command dome, a shadow appeared on the central floor. It did not come from above. It came from memory. It stretched slowly outward in the shape of a hand. Then 5 more. Then a dozen. Dozens of outlines, like echoes of the dead projected onto the surface of power, crawled out from the very foundation of Dominion control. And every shadow was reaching upward. Admiral Krill watched without speaking. His officers stood behind him in silence, their uniforms now dull, their command insignias removed. No alarms blared, no emergency signals activated, because the system had recognized something the humans had always known. This was not a threat, this was the consequence. Dominion ships across sectors began to report identical occurrences, the faces of those they had lost, the faces of those they had killed, projected across halls and displays, not as accusations, but as invitations. Remember us. That was the message. In the colony of Wintershade, where Earth's first orbital habitat had been dismantled, the ground cracked open for the first time in 80 years and revealed beneath it a complete human archive pod, still glowing. Inside, video logs played, children learning, parents arguing, scientists debating ethics. Nothing violent, nothing strategic, just life. And it was more powerful than any weapon. In the medical training facilities of Sector 10, every digital model of human anatomy dissolved and was replaced by a new, unknown configuration, a version of the human body that had evolved, stronger, cleaner, impossible. As doctors tried to analyze the changes, the data restructured itself again. The humans had not returned as they were. They had changed, perfected by absence, refined by death. They had used the silence as soil, and now they had bloomed. On board the Dominion freighter Axiom's Burn, the crew attempted to transmit an apology. The signal refused to send. Instead, their ship's internal lights began flashing a rhythm, a pulse, the same pulse as the beam reaching from Earth. As it flashed, the crew began to cry. None knew why. They only knew they had remembered something they never should have forgotten, and it hurt. Then Earth's two ships began to descend, not fast, not forcefully, gracefully, like leaves falling into place. As they moved, the light between them curved, forming an arc. From that arc, a new ship emerged, larger, smoother, without edges, a vessel that looked more like thought than matter. Its hull shimmered with color patterns that matched no known material. Some said it looked like the ocean, others said it looked like a dream. Whatever it was, it radiated something undeniable: authority without violence, truth without pride, memory without pain. Inside the Dominion's outer listening station, technicians watched as their instruments turned toward the ship on their own. The systems took readings, then shut themselves down. One technician whispered that the machines had seen enough, that they no longer needed to monitor, they only needed to witness. The child turned toward the new ship and smiled, not with joy, not with cruelty, but with recognition. They began to flow toward it. As they did, the stars behind them flickered. Systems across the galaxy went dim for exactly 3 seconds. During those seconds, every living being dreamed the same dream: a field, a sun, a child running toward a figure with open arms. No names, no weapons, only light. Then the systems came back, the stars returned, but nothing was the same. Across Dominion-controlled space, rebellions began to rise, not violent, not chaotic. Citizens laid down their flags, officers stepped out of command posts, entire planets declared neutrality, not because they feared Earth, but because they could no longer lie to themselves. In the intergalactic trade halls of First 9, the Dominion's banner was quietly taken down by the station's oldest vendor. He placed in its place a symbol long outlawed, 3 rings and a line, the Earth symbol, not as defiance, as memory. And the trade continued, but now under a different truth. In Dominion war academies, students refused to continue simulations based on Earth invasions. They cited irrelevance. In the military corps, recruitment dropped to 0 within 24 hours. And in the silence that followed, Earth's message returned, one final time. It said, this is not vengeance, this is not domination, this is balance. What you erased we carried, what you feared we became, what you forgot we remember, and now you will too. The final light from the new ship extended outward, a line of illumination that stretched across the stars like a thread through a tapestry. Where it touched, Dominion infrastructure deactivated, not destroyed, not hacked, disarmed. The line did not stop. It moved steadily toward the Dominion's capital world, toward its center. And though the light was soft, its path was unbroken. At its head floated a child, no longer small, no longer silent. They had become the voice of Earth, and the voice was coming home. The thread of light stretching from the reborn Earth moved with such calm precision that entire star systems stood still to watch it pass, as if the fabric of space had agreed to step aside in reverence, not out of fear. but an acknowledgement of something greater than war, something older than empire, and as it neared the Dominion capital world of Eldara Prime, the heart of everything the Dominion had built over the past century, every satellite, defense array, and scanning net began to fail, not through hacking or brute force, but as though the light carried with it a silence too honest to coexist with denial. And deep within Eldara's planetary command chamber, General Chelon, the longest-standing political architect of the Dominion, stood before a panoramic view of the oncoming phenomenon with hands clasped behind his back and no words to offer, because he had once been a junior officer on the day Earth fell, and though he had risen in rank and buried the memory beneath layers of doctrine and state-approved history, he had never forgotten the sound Earth made when it burned. A sound not recorded by machines but etched into his ribs like a second heartbeat, and now as that same presence returned, not in vengeance, but in absolute clarity, he felt it again, not in his ears, but in his bones, a low and sacred hum that brought water to his eyes and made him speak a name he had not spoken in 40 years, a name that belonged to the medic he left behind during the retreat, a woman who smiled even as she told him to go. And when he said it aloud, the window before him shimmered and displayed her face for 3 seconds, smiling, unchanged, then vanished into static. Around Eldara Prime's orbit, military command cruisers began to lose propulsion, not catastrophically, but gradually, as if the ships themselves no longer wished to move forward, like war machines remembering peace and preferring stillness, and on the ground, Dominion citizens looked up and saw not an approaching weapon, but a ribbon of golden light threading across the sky like a scar stitching itself shut, and as it passed overhead, children reached for it without fear, and the elderly fell to their knees and whispered songs they had not sung since before the conquest, songs their governments had outlawed, claiming they belonged to the enemy, yet here they were, returning like instinct, and in every corner of Dominion space, something similar unfolded, memory rising like smoke from soil, demanding breath. Not attention, just truth, and as that truth spread, walls of propaganda collapsed under their own weight, screens turned black, broadcasts stopped mid-sentence, and statues of Dominion heroes cracked at the base, as if history had refused to carry the lie any further. On the new Earth, which still hovered impossibly between known coordinates, the great vessel of memory opened at its base, revealing an inner core not made of machinery, but of living crystal, pulsing with light that reflected not just what had been lost, but what had been made from laws, and floating toward this core was the child, whose face remained still, calm, not blank, but full of purpose too vast for language, and as they approached, the vessel sang, not in sound, but in color, patterns of gold and blue and white spiraling through space like an anthem only the soul could hear, and in its light, every survivor of Earth, wherever they hid, felt warmth return to the center of their chest, warmth they had forgotten how to trust, and they wept, not because of sadness, but because something sacred had finally arrived, and deep within the Dominion's intelligence network, secret projects meant to harness the psychological profiles of surviving humans shut down permanently, their data corrupted not by malware, but by vision, and the last files displayed one phrase before deletion: they remember everything. In a prison camp orbiting a dead star, where rebel factions had once harbored the last known human prisoners, the guards abandoned their posts and opened every cell, not by command, but by choice, and when asked why, they said, "We felt someone watching," and the prisoners, who had lived in darkness for decades, walked free beneath the light of a star that should have been cold, but now burned with soft fire, and overhead, the thread of light passed, casting no shadow, only clarity, and from the depths of those freed, stories emerged that had no place in textbooks, stories of love, of betrayal, of tiny moments of hope that kept them breathing when there was no air left in belief, and those stories moved through space faster than any ship, carried not on sound waves, but on the willingness of the galaxy to listen. Meanwhile, aboard the Dominion's highest orbiting archive hub, the executive committee met in desperation, demanding retaliation, revival of war protocols, and immediate transmission of military dominance, but the systems would not comply. and the projection at the center of the room changed from their tactical grid to an image of Earth, not the new one, but the original, broken, blackened, scarred, as it had been after the siege, and overlaid on that image were faces, not of enemies, but of civilians, nurses, children, writers, soldiers who had surrendered and been erased, and below it, a line appeared slowly, "This is the debt," and as that line settled into place, the room's temperature dropped, and one by one, each member of the committee remembered the exact moment they had chosen silence instead of mercy, and some began to scream, others to pray, but none could look away. Back near the thread of light, the great vessel shifted its trajectory, no longer static, it turned, slowly, patiently, and aimed not at a location, but at a moment encoded in the minds of every Dominion general. The moment Earth was silenced, and from its core, it emitted not a beam, not a blast, but a pulse, a single vibration that traveled backward in time memory, and forward in time consequence, and when it reached the Dominion's timeline, it touched every instance of their history that had been manipulated, altered, weaponized, and for the first time, the truth played without filter, and the galaxy remembered the real Earth, not perfect, not invincible, but full of something the Dominion had never understood, a defiant grace, and as that grace unfolded like dawn, every Dominion citizen saw themselves not as conquerors, but as children who had broken something beautiful, and could not rebuild it. The child now stood within the corp, arms at their sides, face calm, and from their feet, light spread in every direction, not fast, but endlessly, and as it did, the ships that had watched silently for hours began to receive a final message, written in the language of feeling. It read, "We do not punish, we illuminate," and just as the vessels began to process those words, the sky behind the new Earth began to bend, and from it emerged something no one expected, not another ship, not another planet, but a being, tall, faceless, cloaked in time itself, with hands of flame and eyes of wind, and in one hand it held a single object, the original beacon of Earth, thought destroyed, now whole. And when that being stepped forward, the stars dimmed, the air changed, and the voice returned one final time and said, "Now you will remember who you were before you forgot who we are."